One very important concept you will use when you're designing a program is something called a data structure. We haven't really talked about data structures yet. All we've looked at is a variable which will hold a single value or a string which will hold a string value, a concatenation of characters. But a data structure allows you to manipulate larger amounts of data and to store them in a way that makes sense so that they're easily accessed. The simplest data structure is called an array. An array is named after one variable. In this case, I named it counts. So what it does is, when I declare this, I'm declaring an integer, but it's not just a single integer, it's a set of integers, all under the variable name counts. These two brackets, these square brackets, that's kind of an operator that tells me it's going to be, or it tells Java it's going to be an array. So first I declare it. There's actually two ways to declare an array. You can do it with two statements, where you declare it as an array, and then you actually allocate space for it using the new statement. Just like we had to when we had a scanner, we had to allocate the scanner. We declared it and then we allocated it. So I can do it in two statements where I declare it as an array and then allocate space for it, saying count will be a new array that has 4 integers in it. Okay. The alternate way to declare an array is to do it in one statement. I say that counts is an integer array and it equals 4 integers. So probably the second case is easier, since every time you declare an array, you will actually have to allocate the storage space for it. So that's probably the easier way to do it. When you declare an array and its storage, every element in the array is initialized to 0. So all 4 elements in the array counts will be initialized to 0. Now, this is a very important thing to keep in mind. If I allocate an array with 4 elements, when I index them or when I try to access them, I have to access them by counting them as index 0 is the first element, index 1 is the second, index 2 is the third, and index 3 is the last one, the fourth. So if I have n elements, I have 0 through n minus 1 indices. So again, this would go, the indices here would go 0 to 3. If I had 10 elements, the indices would go 0 to 9. So right after array creation, count 0 is 0, count 1 is 0, count 2 is 0, count 3 is 0. Remember, everything is initialized to 0, so it has some value instead of having garbage in there. Some previous programming languages may have had garbage if you didn't specifically initialize them, so this is a good feature here. All right, now when you're going to access each element in the array, you have to use the square bracket operator. So for example, if I want to think about the first element in counts, which is counts 0, suppose I want to set that equal to 7. I don't want it to be a 0. I want to set it to 7. I want to set the second element, which is counts 1. I want to set it to twice the first element. The third element, which is counts 2, I want to increment it 1. Remember this plus plus, that's like saying number plus 1. It's just an increment operator. And then the last case, I want to set the fourth element, which is counts 3. I want to set it to whatever it is, minus 60. This minus equal, I think we talked about a plus equal in a previous example. Minus equal just says take the variable, subtracts whatever number from it, and assign it. So this is counts 3 equals minus equal. It's the same thing as saying counts 3 equals counts 3 minus 60. So when I'm done, it makes sense that the first element, count 0, should be 7. Remember, counts 1, the second element, is the first element times 2, so that should be 14. This one, all I did was increment it. It used to be a 0, now it's a 1. And this one, it was originally 0, I subtracted 60, now it's a negative 60. If you try to access counts 4, there is no such thing. You allocated 4 elements. Remember, there's 0 through 3. Counts 4 doesn't exist, so it'll give you an array index out of bounds exception. If you try to give a negative index, try to index counts negative 2, that element doesn't exist, so it'll give you the array index out of bounds exception. Again, this is a very important feature because some previous programming languages didn't have that, and you could happily be accessing counts 4 because, hey, you allocated 4 elements, but remember, it goes 0 to 3, counts 4 doesn't exist, and you could be accessing garbage and you don't even realize it. Now, when you're displaying arrays, actually, here's a way to declare an array and initialize it at the same time. I'm declaring array A. I see the square brackets tell me that it's an array, And instead of saying that it's going to have 4 and using the new operator, I'm just right out saying dump all of this into array A. So Java automatically knows that it has to allocate space. I don't need to do the new, and it's going to have 4 elements. So if you know what the values of your array are going to be right off, this is a good way to initialize them. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to print out each element in the array. One thing that you have to keep in mind, I can't just say println A, because what that's going to do is it's going to print out the address of the array A, where array A is stored. That's not what you want. You don't want the internal address of the array. You want each element of the array. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at index 0. Remember, I declared I as my initializer. I can only use I within here. There's something called .length. So if I take the array .length, that'll tell me how long the array is. So basically, this will say the array has 4 in it, and so that's going to go from 0 to 3. This length will be 4, so I want to go 0 to 1 less than 4, so 0 to 3. And again, each time I iterate through, I'm going to increment I. So what it'll do is first it'll print out A0. It'll cycle back through. It'll print out A1, A2, and A3. It'll stop before it gets to A4. Okay, and in this case, the output's all on a different line because I'm doing println. When you're copying arrays, you can do basically the same thing. I declared this array B to be a set of doubles. And here's where I declared it as array. In this case, I'm allocating space. I'm not initializing to anything like I did here because I'm going to just be doing something with it. Okay, so I declared and allocated the new array B. So this time I used K as my index. So I declared K here. I know that it has a 3, so I'm using 3 here. It probably makes more sense to do A.length, but maybe I only want to do the first 3. So again, each time I go through, I start with 0. So B0 is assigned to whatever A0 is. I go through again, B1 is assigned to whatever A1 is, and so on until I get to the end of the array. Another way to do the same thing, if I'm just copying the entire array, or if I only want to copy a certain number of elements of the array, I could say, here's my array being declared, and I want to set it equal to, this is from the arrays library function, copy. I just want to copy. I make a copy of array A. I want the first 3 elements. So you can see that I asked for the first 3 elements, but remember array A has 4 actual elements in it. So array B will only get 1, 2, and 3, A0, A1, and A2. It will not get the 4th element because I said only give the first 3 elements. So you can specify how many elements you want. If you do a complete copy, if there's something wrong, it should pad it with zeros. If you're ever in doubt of what a library function does, a good way to verify what it actually does is look online. Just search online. What does the copy of function in the arrays library do? What exactly does it do? In this case, it copies that many elements.